All right. Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Backyard Professor Live program. I have got a gigantic night ahead of me tonight, and I am thrilled. It has been a terrific week preparing for this. I have had more fun than a barrel of monkeys. I do need to make an announcement real quick, just for your information. Some of you have already seen this. Some of you haven't. I did make a video Wednesday, 4 days ago, on the Nahom Archaeological bullseye. I was going to put that in tonight, and it dawned on me, wow, it'll make tonight way too big. So I have made an extra video in conjunction with last week's live and tonight's live. So if you haven't seen it, you will go on and watch that, because it's a perfect contrast from my point of view of what makes a archaeological bullseye compared to just a lucky guess or a coincidence, which I do believe Nahom is. I will put the links in the description below to this video. So anyway, welcome everybody. Mark Crispin. Yeah, baby. I haven't done that with you for a while, huh? Tim Rathbone, good to see you. Tessa Don Smith, good to see you. Okay, so people are coming in. Let's get started. I'm going to jump right on this. This second half of this debate between Philip Jenkins and Bill Hamblin, the Mormon apologist, the Mormon knight in shining armor, is a watershed moment, I believe. This is where the entire enterprise of Mormon apologetics was demonstrated to not be on as sound a footing as the apologists like to make it seem. I'm being very gentle on them right now. Bill Hamblin got completely massacred. His arguments got completely wiped out. In this second half, we get to the much more meatier discussion. It is much more involved. I'm going to ask you for your patience. Hamblin is the best obfuscator I have ever read, other than John Gee, when we're talking about the Joseph Smith Papyri, and that is really saying something. If you've never read John Gee's long line of malarkey of irrelevancies, wow. So I have picked and chose what parts of this debate I'm going to utilize tonight. I have not left out as much this time as I did last week. However, I am going to be much more inclusive. And there are some parts where, in order to give you the total effect, I simply must wade through Hamblin's effort to try to snowball us. I apologize in advance for putting you to sleep. I will try to read it excitedly and all that jazz. Yes. So, hey, CM Bauer, good to see you. Dan Vogel, good to see you, my friend. My wife thinks I insulted you here a couple of weeks ago. I sure hope that's not the case. If I did, I do apologize. I might have offended you or something. I can't remember what. You're used to me. You know how I am. So never, ever. Wanda Anthony, good to see you too. So what we're going to do tonight, let me get started. I'm done blathering about what's going on. Let's show you what's going on. We're in the second half of this debate, and it is seriously significant. Oh, hold on. I've got to share my screen. Let me share my screen and my window. And there it is. That is the one I want. Let us share. Okay, here we go. Now, I'm not going to be able to see you in your comments. I will switch back and forth a little bit, but let's get going on this, because the significance of this will begin to become apparent the further we go on. Here's Jenkins. He says, I spent a great many messages pressing home one question again and again. Give me one piece of credible evidence for the Book of Mormon. If you do that, then the book might be worth reading and discussing. If not, not. So repeatedly, I have asked for one piece of evidence from the Americas, and answer has come, there is none, for the simple and obvious reason that there is none. There is no other field of academic study. There is no other field of academic study, get this, in which a situation like this would arise, in which alleged experts would not be able to produce a single fact to support the existence. And this is the key. This is what we want to focus on. We're just asking for evidence for the existence of their boasted field of activity. Don't worry about what its value is, just its existence. And Hamblin never got around to that. The really remarkable thing is, you guys, neither did Dan Peterson, who waded in on it just a little bit. Neither did Stephen Smoot. Neither did John Gee. Neither did Neil Rapalli. None of them ever got to that. So what I've heard instead from Dr. Hamblin is, now hold your horses. We have to discuss rules first. We can't deal with those vulgar facts. Then we move to a good catalog of reasons why no such answers are possible. And then recently we get the okay, now I am going on the offensive. I will discuss pottery evidence. And a waiting world expects finally some attempt at an answer, no matter how credulous or ill-argued. What pottery evidence will be forthcoming and offered? But no, his next contribution, astonishingly, is a series of questions designed purely for the purpose of delay and confusing the question, is there any archaeological evidence for the existence of Israelites and Judeans in Iron Age Mesopotamia? This is what Hamblin actually ended up asking. And, or are those tens of thousands of Israelites and Judeans essentially transparent in the archaeological record? I mean, talk about absolutely having nothing to do with nothing whatsoever. Hey, Doug Vincent, good to see you, my friend. It's silly how he does this. Jenkins says it's pathetic. I imagine that if I answer this, the next question is going to be, Moses led 600,000 Israelites from Egypt. What were their names, their addresses, and cell phone numbers? He's clearly making fun of Hamblin's methodology here. And at that point, he still will not be offering a single piece of evidence. It is up to him to offer the evidence. We will hear this time and again because this is the methodologically correct way for someone who has a claim to back it up. That someone making the claim must offer evidence. If he has none, he should be honest enough to admit it. And now I hear that this constant strategy of flagrant evasion was in a para-Socratic fashion, attempting to get me to reflect on some of his naive assumptions about how we can supposedly prove the Book of Mormon. What arrogant nonsense. Ooh, see, now they're to the point. Look, they've been talking back and forth now for dozens of posts and at least a month and a half or so, and they're both getting tired of the ridiculousness that Hamblin is showing. So they're kind of coming out a little bit more with claws. He's awfully good at deploying. This is critical. Pay attention to this. This is how the apologist will treat you online if you get in to this kind of a scholarly assessment, especially if it involves archaeology, etc. He is awfully good at deploying impressive sounding academic words to conceal the total vacuity of his argument. In other words, the emptiness of his argument. You do know there is a difference between para-Socratic and constantly weaseling out of giving a straight answer. And now Jenkins hammers at home. You do know that for the rest of the world, seeking historical facts is not considered naive, nor is seeking corroborating evidence for allegedly historical texts. This was the point where it was obvious that Bill Hamblin was floundering so badly that he needed a diplomatic out. I mean, when he started asking completely irrelevant questions, that was it. And I tried to give him one, which he has spurned. If Dr. Hamblin has a shred of worthwhile evidence, he would use it, and this is also very critical. Absolutely. Now, here's my comment. I say, I really must emphasize this as it is the standard apologetic ploy. I can ask biblical scholars and archaeologists this, and they most certainly immediately hop on the evidence, of course. Not so much with the Mormon apologists, however. This is the best way to start and continue hammering the idea home if someone online is trying to convince you of the Book of Mormon historicity. Now, understand If and when said evidence actually is found and shows up, let's say that it really does show up, then we will, of course, after assessing and seeing it is validly accepted by all parties, Mormon and non-Mormon scholars alike, as viable, then we will certainly change our minds because, as good scholars do, we follow the evidence. That's our confidence. Now, the apologists, of course, will not do the flip side of that. Not a chance. So Jenkins continues. He doesn't and he can't. If he wants to contradict that, then he should cut the continuing garbage and evasion and answer the core question. No, you do not need to establish all sorts of rules about the nature of the alleged discipline of ancient Book of Mormon studies. No, you don't need to lay the foundation of some hermeneutic he has just invented. And no, we don't need to have a detailed reading of the tract that Joseph Smith invented in 1830. We need facts. We need any trace of the archaeological footprint that would undoubtedly exist if hundreds of thousands or millions of these people had lived in the Americas at any given time, if they had cities and empires and roads. We need one thing, just one thing, apologists, an answer to this question. Can anyone cite any single credible fact, object, site, or inscription from the New World that supports any one story found in the Book of Mormon? One sherd of pottery, one tool of bronze or iron, one carved stone, one piece of genetic data. And by credible, I mean drawn from a reputable scholarly study, an academic book, or a refereed journal, not some cranky piece of pseudoscience. Here's my response. This is the only question that matters for online discussions on archaeology in the Book of Mormon. Until it is answered, we can justifiably say we don't even have to believe. We will not wait, or I should say we will wait until the actual reality is situated and accepted by all parties, not just Mormons hiding behind their own invented Mormon journals, imagining they are peer-reviewed and not published in standard, established academic journals of credibility the world over. We all know better, and we can see right through that phony screed of the Mormons now. Jenkins continues, Dr. Hamblin says, I've asked this question annoyingly often, and he may be right. His flat refusals to answer the question have been precisely as numerous and as annoying, and as revealing about the total lack of support for a word he says on Book of Mormon issues. He has never made the slightest effort to answer the question. Evasion, evasion, evasion. The emperor has no clothes. But Hamblin is very good indeed at suggesting why everyone else is dishonest and naive if they think they see him without clothes. If a view is in any sense scholarly or scientific, then it must be open to verification and falsifiability. See, in this methodology, there has to be some fact or insight, however hypothetical, that would make an apologist lose confidence in the Book of Mormon. That's right, you heard it right. Bear with him as he explains the logic. I've already said where my own view might be falsified, so I would ask Dr. Hamblin, who never answered this question. He never did say what would break him. Very interesting. Jenkins did, but Hamblin wouldn't. Or any apologist. Let me ask him, what is that potential deal breaker for you? If you replied that no piece of external evidence could shake your belief, however overwhelming it might seem, then you are stating explicitly that your view is a matter of faith and not of science, scholarship, or history. And if that is so, then there is no point in trying to argue the issues in those terms of science, scholarship, or history. It is purely internal to you, and that's not a negative. Just don't pretend that you have any claim in the realm of science, scholarship, or history. And I respond, that is entirely fair. No, not that fair. There are no, Jenkins continues, there are no ancient Book of Mormon studies because the book was cooked up in 1830. It reflects no reality in the ancient Americas. If it is ancient, it is not Book of Mormon. If it is Book of Mormon, it is not ancient. Don't you want to hear that? Then convince me otherwise. Give me facts. If you had the slightest confidence in your claims, you would be falling all over yourselves, giving me this archaeological site and that inscription and this Mayan text. You aren't doing that because none exists. I say, key point for all apologists. Seriously, this is what they would do, and they would publish their discovery in the New York Times if they really had something. Make no mistake about it, they want this as badly as we do. So if they had it, Jenkins and Hamblin have been going at it now for about a month together. Hamblin still won't even answer the question. He won't present anything either. Very interesting. Now Jenkins begins to smash everything. The last refuge of the desperate is his claim that doubt about the Book of Mormon arises from its religious context. The problem with the Book of Mormon is that it claims Jesus visited the New World. These claims, rather than its claims about pre-Columbian American archaeology, are the fundamental reason it receives almost no serious attention by pre-Columbian scholars. Preposterous, utter baloney, and you know it. The reason nobody believes it is that there is zero positive evidence in its favor. If you believe that statement is wrong, then give me the evidence, one piece. And here's what I say, exactly right. Jenkins gets a gold star on his forehead for this straightforward destruction of a meager dodge from Hamblin to attempt to get out of it all and failing in the process. Jenkins continues, will I be reading my way through the assorted cranks of ancient Book of Mormon studies? No. And let me explain why by analogy. There is a contemporary writer in our day called David Icke, a former footballer who has produced a number of books that achieve remarkable sales. His views are somewhat unconventional. In 4 books published over 7 years, The Robots' Rebellion and The Truth Shall Set You Free, The Biggest Secret, The Children of the Matrix, he set out a worldview that combined New Age spiritualism with the denunciation of totalitarian trends in the modern world. At the heart of his theories lies the idea that a secret group of reptilian humanoids called the Babylonian Brotherhood, and this includes George W. Bush, Queen Elizabeth II, Chris Christopherson, and Boxcar Willie, controls humanity, and that many prominent figures are reptilian. He further proposes that the moon is an artificial construct, probably a hollowed-out planetoid, from which the reptilians broadcast an artificial sense of self in the world that humans mistakenly perceive as reality. Now, Jenkins says, personally, I find this view extremely improbable, and most regular people who take the trouble to note them dismiss them as worthless garbage. But his work raises interesting questions about the burden of proof. I'm not going to waste my time trying to disprove anything Mr. Icke says because it is a waste of time. Actually, I can't disprove anything, even about Boxcar Willie. He, Icke, not Willie, has to prove it. If he wishes to establish his views now, he should do so in reputable outlets, not just self-published books. And we are living in an era in Mormonism of the self-published book. I mean, everybody and their home teacher is publishing books on the truthfulness of Mormon scripture and stuff like that, right? No, that's not good enough. That seems obvious to me, but the distinction seems lost on many commenters who don't understand why the burden of proof lies on the person presenting the self-evidently flaky and radically counterintuitive view. Extraordinary views demand extraordinary evidence. I say Jenkins' perfect analogy using Icke. Hamblin still didn't grasp it, however, and I'm not kidding. You'll see later on. Jenkins says, nor do I have to read every word Icke has written in order to form a pretty good opinion of his views. This is the other tactic that Mormon apologists will throw at us. They are, as I say, prima facie outrageous. and I will wait until they are presented in a proper format with a couple of convincing and credible items supporting his beliefs. And here is one of the bonus points that Hamblin tries to get Jenkins on, and Jenkins destroys his argument. He says, "It is not legitimate to say that I can form no opinion until I have read every page of his material, nor do I have any patience with comments that I therefore forfeit any right to comment on the issues at hand on the basis that just possibly a worthwhile argument might lurk on page 335. This is one of the apologetic tactics to try to get you intimidated, and you don't have to fall for it. Nor, similarly, do I intend to struggle through the collected nonsense of the non-academic, non-discipline of ancient Book of Mormon studies. That is not a prejudice on my part. It just reflects the observation that for all the assembled efforts, writings, and so-called research of these folks, they can't produce one single solitary piece of evidence to support their cause. And here's what I say. This is where we keep our eye on the only issue that matters here. Jenkins is powerfully doing this. Parallels to Book of Mormon names are not identification, as in the case of, say, King Hezekiah fighting Sennacherib in the Assyrian invasion of 701 BC. Yes, there are parallels from both sides in document form, but they are identifying parallels. Not a name sort of similar to Hezekiah. It is Hezekiah. This is what the Book of Mormon lacks. Not one of its people are verified to have historically lived. And the reason I'm going to keep bringing up Sennacherib and Hezekiah is because that is the subject of my Wednesday video that you really need to watch. It'll give you extra content. Well, Jenkins adds more power to the point he's making. In my attempt to draw these exchanges to a civil conclusion, I suggested that Dr. Hamblin and I had reached a stalemate. I was being polite, magnanimous. Is there any doubt that I have entirely made the case I set out to a month or so back? Not by me, they're not, no. What I said was that there was no evidence for the historicity of the Book of Mormon, and this involves historical, genetic, archaeological, linguistic, any of it, in any line of inquiry, and that anyone wishing to contradict that view should do so by producing credible and specific evidence. All right, that makes sense, right? Well, Dr. Hamblin is, I believe, one of the leading apologists in this field, and he is correct then. And he's written a great deal recently on this blog, but without even attempting to produce a single example or illustration to contradict my view. So what is a man to think? Well, is there any doubt that the most significant issue by far is establishing that the peoples and the communities and the societies described in either book were actually present at the times and places described? In past posts, I have described some of the resources available within the Middle East. You have common archaeological patterns of sequences of architecture and pottery and metalwork. You have various types of linguistic evidence of inscriptions. You have visual records, and of course, of texts of all different kinds. You have historical, you have legal texts, religious texts, medical texts. You also have economic texts and all the rest. In particular, one would be strictly fastidious in drawing entirely unverified contemporary texts from the period in question. One would also be cautious about drawing on any text or object about which there was any controversy or any suggestion that it was a later forgery. This is just basic stuff here, you guys. I adapt the following from my earlier answers to comments at my own blog. If you apply those methodologies to the Bible, there's no doubt that between, say, the 13th century BC and the 1st century AD, so he's picking an entire millennium, the same length of time the Book of Mormon is said to have existed for those people. Okay, so he's saying, let's take that same time frame, 13th century BC and the 1st century AD. The region of Palestine was definitely inhabited by a range of people whose ethnic and linguistic identities we are absolutely confident of. One among them was Hebrew, and we know the languages spoken at the time and the place. We also have a great idea of who the Canaanites, the Philistines, the Nabateans, the Edomites, the Greeks, etc. were, and we can confirm they were really present, more or less, where the texts say they were present. Also, those identities are thoroughly confirmed by texts and narratives from the nearby societies, such as the Assyrians, the Egyptians, the Romans. So, in some cases, we can be quite sure of the individuals involved, and we can be certain of the real identity of many of the places. Now, I would argue that we confidently know a lot more than this, but for our present purposes, I just offer this as a minimal floor. Okay, very good. There are plenty of people who would challenge the Bible on virtually every point of its belief system, and challenge large parts of its historical value, who dispute, for instance, the existence of most named characters before the 5th century BC. I disagree strongly with such minimalists, but let that pass. Here's the key point. Yet none of those skeptics disputes that the peoples and the languages and the ethnic groups described in the Bible were in fact there throughout that extended millennium I describe. And if such a lone nut exists, I would love to know his or her name, right? Take everything I just said and apply it to the Book of Mormon. Now, it also depicts a range of peoples, states, societies, ethnicities, languages, etc., none of which has ever received the slightest degree of confirmation. Zero. Literally and precisely none of the peoples, none of the places. Well, lacking such evidence of mere existence, everything else we read in the Book of Mormon is of necessity a blank. And that involves all the narratives, all the claims, all the stories, all the individuals. And here I ask sincerely, can anyone actually not understand Jenkins on this point? Yet you watch. Hamblin totally waffles with it. It's quite frankly, shockingly unbelievable, but he does. I'll show you. I say again, Jenkins says, I'm not asking you to prove anything. I just seek one simple fact that, and here's the key, we need one simple fact to begin to confirm the claims made in the Book of Mormon. And then we can build on that if you wish, but we have to start with one. That is the minimum requirement. We're not asking you for a miracle. We're asking you for a simple piece of evidence. So the difference is this. We know that the peoples described by the Bible really were there. This is key. We do know that. And we can establish that fact overwhelmingly and convincingly by multiple methodologies, which have been verified by the most critical and skeptical scholarship. But we have not the slightest morsel of evidence that the peoples described by the Book of Mormon were there. If that does not seem to you a total and overwhelmingly night and day distinction, I fail to see how I can make that point clearer. Nor do I see how even the most excruciatingly detailed knowledge of the Book of Mormon itself would even change the picture. It doesn't. My response? One of the Mormon apologists' favorite tactics so they can call their opponents ignorant and therefore supposedly lack credibility is just this. It doesn't work that way. Good luck convincing the apologist, though, if you end up discussing these ideas with them, right? I have indeed read the Book of Mormon, which is, as I say, an inestimable gold mine for early 19th century U.S. history, but please guide me. Where in this pages do I find any hint that might contradict the statements above or help us find the errant evidence? By your admission, Bill Hamblin, Ancient Book of Mormon Studies has been what you call a thriving and highly active discipline for some 30 years now, with many publications. Well, surely these people have combed the Book of Mormon backwards and forwards in search of every clue. So why can't they and you give me instance one to contradict what I say here? Are there chapters of the book that have not yet been found in their searches? Yeah, it's called the 116 Lost Plates and the 2/3 sealed portion, but you'll never get that. As I have said, we don't need your phantasmagoric ground rules. We need facts to establish that these people existed. There is the key right there, truly. Amen, Brother Ben. So I have raised various types of evidence that might be used to test statements in the Book of Mormon, but let me focus here on one, namely inscriptions of various kinds. These are very common in the ancient Jewish world, for instance, on stone and metalwork. The Book of Mormon supposedly describes a literate society, necessarily because such peoples need religious texts for worship and study. Okay, that makes sense. Presumably, those Middle Eastern immigrants kept up writing in the New World in any one of a number of possible languages, including Smith's wholly invented Reformed Egyptian. Also, those peoples reputedly kept up that high literate civilization for an awe-inspiring 1,000 years. Now, this is huge. That's a big point that he keeps hitting. So here is a specific question. Where, please, in the New World do we find any inscriptions of any kind that preserve any one of those imported languages in their scripts? Where is the Hebrew or the Egyptian hieroglyphic? And if you say that we don't know what Reformed Egyptian looks like, then point me to an area in Mesoamerica, say, where we have a large batch of puzzling and still untranslated carved texts in a mysterious script that vaguely recalls Middle Eastern precedents. You can legitimately say that a population can live in an area for a period without leaving such inscriptions and texts, perhaps because of inferior social status. But for a whole millennium? Come now. When the supposed immigrants were the rulers and the dominant peoples? And here's my response. Just who is it that writes the history? The winners, the kings, the rulers, the commandants, the dictators, etc. So surely the Book of Mormon leaders would have assured everyone in their control knew of their successes in war, their greatness in economical advances, their magnificent cities, their trade routes, their standing armies, even if they number a whopping 2,000 stripling warriors, etc. You're supposed to be giggling right now. Perhaps during the long ocean crossing, those highly literate Hebrews had been struck by a fit of modesty that prevented them commemorating their deeds. I am asking specific questions that can be answered briefly and precisely. If you know Semitic inscriptions in, say, a mysterious temple in the wilds of Guatemala, then please point me to it, and I shall be delighted to examine the evidence. You see, he's even telling Bill, he's saying, look, I'm happy to see this. But you can't, can you? Because no such thing exists. Am I wrong about that? Then prove it. I await with fascination. Get this, here's what Jenkins prophesies. I await with fascination the excuses, the waffling, and invasions you will be using to avoid answering these questions. You've been arguing with him for months, so here's my comment here. Hamblin, amazingly enough, does not disappoint here. His waffling is astonishing from here on out. It got so bad, you guys, that other LDS apologists jumped in to try to help his sagging commentary and evasions. And Jenkins decimated them as well, as I'm going to show you here tonight. So Hamblin waffles. Here is Hamblin's response to those questions. A parody of the debate thus far. Jenkins, show me evidence for the Book of Mormon. Hamblin, I think we first need to discuss questions of presuppositions, methodology, and epistemology in order to understand what would constitute evidence and how it can be interpreted properly. Jenkins, no, show me the evidence for the Book of Mormon, now. Hamblin, well, there's lots of evidence and analysis presented in books and articles by LDS scholars, like Sorensen's Mormon Codex. Will you read them? Jenkins, no. All Mormon scholars are cranks and hacks. I refuse to read anything they have to say. Show me the evidence for the Book of Mormon, now. Hamblin, well, I'm a Mormon scholar. If you won't read books or articles from Mormon scholars, why should I think you'd accept what I have to say? Jenkins, you're stalling. There is no evidence for the Book of Mormon, or you'd show it to me. Hamblin, well, I pointed to evidence in Sorensen's Mormon Codex. Jenkins, that book is by a Mormon. I want evidence, not pseudoscientific crap. Hamblin, all right, you asked for examples of Nephite pottery. Before we can deal with that issue, we need to try to understand what pottery can and can't tell us about the past. No, you've shown me no evidence. I've won. Hamblin sighs. Now, here's my reaction to that. That is literally Hamblin's scholarly response to a very credible, lucid question about giving Jenkins evidence. Hamblin is so bankrupt, man, that at this point, the other apologists were doing some research to help poor Bill out. He is clearly entirely out of his league. Man, he's over his head. He's drowning. Hamblin continues to evade the issue with excuses, for which Jenkins spanks his philosophy and avoidance of giving us the goods right proper. Here is what Hamblin goes on to say. Jenkins has repeatedly asserted that since there is ample historical evidence in the ancient Near East, one should expect to find similar quantities of evidence in the New World. Therefore, by analogy, we should expect ample evidence for the era of the Book of Mormon. Alas, he is seriously misinformed. And of course, yeah, everyone who disagrees with a Mormon apologist is misinformed. Why? But of course. Hamblin continues, for the ancient Near East, we have literally hundreds of thousands of inscriptions and written texts. Contrast this with the New World, where there the inscriptions number in the hundreds, perhaps a couple thousand. Note there is probably several thousand times as much textual evidence from the ancient Near East as there is for the entire New World. And that, of course, ignores manuscript evidence, the Bible, Jewish texts, Greek and Roman books, Egyptian papyri, etc. When we look at the New World, we find perhaps several thousand written texts that survive from the classic period, that is 200 to 1,000 of the Common Era. Most of these are royal inscriptions and brief texts on royal ritual pottery. The vast majority date to the Middle and Late Classic. There are no surviving books from this period. There are about a dozen codices from the late post-classical period, 1000 to 1600 of the Common Era. But the Book of Mormon deals almost entirely with the pre-classic period, 1800 before the Classic Era to 200 of the Classic Era. During that period, there are perhaps a few dozen inscriptions. No books. The inscriptions are nearly all short, often marginally legible, fragmentary, and often can't be read because of script and language issues. And here is Hamblin's important point. I maintain that the only thing that could securely establish the historicity of Book of Mormon peoples would be written texts containing Book of Mormon personal names or place names. No other type of evidence would be conclusive. Okay, we will hold him to that. And here's what I say. This will become absolutely damning to Hamblin here in a little bit when he tries to show an actual Book of Mormon name in the Mayan text. Just keep this idea in mind for a few moments. Notice he is simply saying he's looking for the names of the people, but this is wrong. That would present parallels, but not equivalence, not identification. Inscriptions with Ishmael on them in Saudi Arabia anciently do not demonstrate the Ishmael of the Book of Mormon, as there are many of those Ishmaels on inscriptions. No Mormon scholar has yet come out and said that we now have our Book of Mormon Ishmael verified archaeologically. None of them. They avoid claiming the identification because the parallels they present don't pass muster. We need exact identifications, like we have for Hezekiah, king of Judah, as the Assyrian king Sennacherib identified him in his own inscriptions, corroborating the biblical record of what the Hezekiah also said and did. That is unmistakable. It's not just a mere parallel here. We're going beyond that to identification of the historically real Hezekiah. This is what we need for the Book of Mormon, and this is what we do not have. You don't get to make extra wiggle room for obfuscation due to the lack of evidence, Dr. Hamblin. That's not going to fly. So let's see what else he says. He continues on. See, the problem is, here we go. There is insufficient data to undertake such a comparison. Furthermore, the personal and place names in Mesoamerican texts tend to be emblem glyphs, symbolic representations, rather than phonetic texts. Perhaps a half a dozen place names are known from pre-classic texts. The phonetic reading of almost all of these is unknown. Jenkins asks about the question of falsifiability. I will set aside the problem, of course you will, that this is really a methodology issue for empirical experimental science, which doesn't really work with non-empirical historical questions. Jenkins slaps him on this one. But the best test of falsifiability for the Book of Mormon would be the absence of Book of Mormon names in the corpus of pre-classical inscriptions. If we had, say, phonetic readings for several thousand personal and place names in pre-classic Mesoamerica and found no Book of Mormon names there, that would be problematic for the Book of Mormon. The problem is there is no such data. It is also faulty methodology to take classic royal or place names for which we have perhaps a couple of hundred examples as a database for pre-classic times. Again, many, if not most, cannot be read phonetically with certainty. First, place names change through time. For instance, Byzantium, Constantinople, Istanbul, Jerusalem, Aelia, Capitolina, Quds. And second, we would no more expect to find a Book of Mormon personal name in classic Maya royal inscriptions than we should expect to find Augustine or Hannibal, the two most famous people in ancient Tunisia, in the corpus of Arabic era royal inscriptions of Tunisia. They're not there. So, the problem is not that the Book of Mormon does not pass the test of finding personal or place names in pre-classic New World texts. The problem is that a meaningful test cannot be undertaken because there is not a sufficient database with which to compare Book of Mormon proper names. And now Jenkins responds to this whole irrelevant excuse. As you say, a parody. Now, as to that evidence you are not producing, you write, I think we first need to discuss questions of presuppositions, methodology, and epistemology in order to understand what would constitute evidence and how it can be interpreted properly. Why would that be? Notice, Jenkins just keeps it straightforward, simple. Why do we have to go through all of that? We're both grown-ups. We're both published historians. We know these issues extremely well. I've lived with these issues for 40 plus years, and I'm guessing that your track record is similar. We're not trying to run a senior history seminar for undergraduates, Bill. I assume and believe that you are thoroughly au fait with the ancient Book of Mormon literature. You presumably know the nuggets in those books that make you stop and proclaim, Eureka! So why do we need to go through all of this palaver before you give me what I'm asking for, which is that one clincher piece of evidence that makes mainstream historians or archaeologists say, whoa, my Lord, the Book of Mormon is onto something. Seriously, why is this not happening? My suspicion, as I've said on several occasions, is that you have nothing to contribute in that way. Would you care to prove me wrong? And now here's my comment, the key to refuting apologists. No matter how sophisticated or scholarly they sound or make things look when they write, either in a scholarly article or a book, stick with the issue. Evidence of reality. We need evidence, not just parallels. And now Hamblin responds. In his number 11, Jenkins asks, why would that importance of a methodological discussion be? We're both grown-ups. We are both published historians. We know these issues extremely well. I've lived with these issues for 40 years, et cetera, et cetera. Here's Hamblin's response. First, methodology is important because other people are reading this besides you and me. And here was my first reaction to this, and now it is my same reaction. So I'm going to give you my reaction. Exactly why you should quit waffling and show Jenkins a piece of evidence. Duh, because other people are watching. People are reading, and they're recognizing that Mormon apologetics has no evidence for the Book of Mormon historicity. Hamblin absolutely proved this to me in this long yet instructive debate. This is a major seismological turning point for me personally. Carrie Scherf's the backyard professor. It helped me realize the Book of Mormon is not what it's claimed to be. That's interesting. Bill Hamblin helped push me off the edge with this debate. He says, second, it is important because I've had this type of debate before, and it usually has devolved into epistemological and methodological impasse. I say that's philosophy. We need evidence, not words of why it's so difficult to acquire the evidence. Hamblin then says, third, because things you have said indicate that we are not on the same page on the methodological questions. For example, you asked for Nephite pottery. My answer is that pottery alone, without either art or text, can tell us precisely nothing of the ethnicity, the political status, the culture, the language, or religion of the people who made the pot, or the people who used the pot, which can be two different groups. Your request for Nephite pottery seems extremely naive, and here's my response. Jenkins does answer this issue, but I also want to say it. Jenkins, nowhere said Nephite pottery. Bill Hamblin's building a straw man on purpose. See, so you gotta watch those tricky apologists. They'll catch you and try to trip you up. Just keep your eye on the prize, which is give us the evidence to help establish they're real. That's not asking too much. Sure, the apologists want to make you think that's asking too much, but it is not asking too much. Hey, Mr. Rabbit, good to see you. Richard Petchak, good to see you. C.M. Bauer. Hey, Doug. All right, so you guys are here and having fun. Okay, let me keep going. So, fourth, Hamblin says, your repeated insistence that there is somehow a parity in quantity and quality between the ancient Mesoamerican and the ancient Near Eastern is misinformed. Of course, everybody else is always misinformed. Yeah, we get that. We get that. Again, an apologetic tactic to intimidate. Now, they need to try and make all comers against the Book of Mormon look weaker than apologists are. Less intelligent, misinformed, naive, ignorant, haven't read as much as we have, don't know enough ancient languages, you suck at math, you can't weave baskets underwater, you're lousy at skateboarding, you don't own a Harley, you're certainly less good looking, etc. Whatever it takes, apologists must cover the fact that they have no evidence for the Book of Mormon. So that's why all of the name calling comes out. The acerbic, caustic handling of people in the discussion, the insults, the insinuations, the raised eyebrows, farting out loud to excuse themselves, etc. Once we come to this recognition, all of their tactics disappear like the morning dews before the sunrise. Stick with the issue that matters and victory is imminent. Don't let them take you down a rabbit trail. Hamblin says, fifth, your response to the Nahom inscription was methodologically weak, of course. I'll probably get to that later if the discussion has not imploded by then. Now, Jenkins, here we go. Jenkins comes out and he says this. Here we go again. What Dr. Hamblin does here is precisely what I expected and predicted, namely, to give me reasons why he cannot produce evidence to support his case, rather than actually giving me the evidence. What is he trying to do? What he is trying to do is to start a debate in which I accept his presuppositions about the lack of evidence with the goal of losing track of the central theme. Why can't he produce any evidence whatever? And this is a key insight, you guys. Jenkins is on to him. His whole idea of, we have to establish parameters of epistemology. All of that is to get you to lose sight of the central theme. So Jenkins is on. He also shoots himself in both feet with one particular line. He is trying to explain the lack of Middle East inscription evidence in Mesoamerica, and he carries on. But the Book of Mormon deals almost entirely with the pre-classic period. During that period, there are perhaps a few dozen inscriptions, no books. The inscriptions are nearly all short, often marginally legible, fragmentary, and often can't be read because of script and language issues. And Jenkins' response is, exactly. So if the great Book of Mormon civilization is there, why is it not producing hundreds and thousands more inscriptions in Hebrew, Reformed Egyptian, etc.? It sort of suggests that civilization isn't there, right? Ooh! Cuts right to the heart, doesn't he? I love that response. You assuredly know the Book of Mormon better than I do, Bill Hamblin, so I might be in error here. Oh, and here he misunderstands about the dating. That's not a big deal. I'm reading your comment as carefully as I can, but you just misunderstood my question about falsifiability and have not answered it. You write this. Jenkins asked about the question of falsifiability. I'll set aside the problem that this is really a methodology issue for empirical experimental science, which doesn't really work with non-empirical historical questions. Listen to Jenkins' idea. No, what I'm asking is this. For you personally, what is the point that would make you lose faith in the case you make supporting the Book of Mormon? For instance, as I said, what is that potential deal breaker for you, Bill Hamblin, or for you, Mr. Mormon apologist? If you reply that no piece of external evidence can shake your belief, however overwhelming it might seem, then you are stating explicitly that your view is a matter of faith and not of science, scholarship, or history. If that is so, then there is no point in trying to argue the issue in those terms. It is purely internal to you. Just don't pretend that you have any claim in the realm of science, scholarship, or history. And I note, Hamblin never did indicate what the deal breaker was for him. Yeah, don't let that cat out of the bag. Absolutely not. Quick, change the subject, Bill. And he did. Jenkins goes on, if that's not clear, please let me know, and I will rephrase it in some other form, but this really does need to be answered. I've told you what the deal breakers are for myself, and I'd like us to be on equal terms, please. Hamblin had no interest in being on equal terms, so he did not say anything in that regard. His response in his number 12 now, Jenkins asks, exactly. So if the great Book of Mormon civilization is there, why is it not producing hundreds and thousands more inscriptions in Hebrew, Reformed Egyptian, etc.? It sort of suggests that civilization isn't there, right? Again, Hamblin says, again, alas, methodological naivete. I respond, there it is, just like clockwork, eh? You got to call your opponent names. He's naive. First, to say, why isn't there more evidence is a silly question. Another one. Whee! Can he get 3 of these insults in one paragraph? Anybody want to place any money? First, the evidence, Hamblin says, is what it is. It is not what you think it should be, nor what you wish it might be. Second, ancient Israel left almost no inscriptions. Why should you assume the Nephites were phonetic inscription writers? Oh, I don't know. Maybe it's because they left wagon loads of gold plates with writing in a gigantic hill cave in the hill Cumorah that you could literally walk into. Just asking. Anyway, it's not prominent in the Book of Mormon. Third, sparsity of inscriptions in the norm in ancient times, not the exception. The Near East is unique in all the world for its vast number of surviving ancient inscriptions. Fourth is the question of writing material and preservation. The earliest pre-classic inscriptions in Mesoamerica seem to have been 1, painted rather than inscribed, 2, carved in wood. Neither of these survive well in Mesoamerican ecology. All classic inscriptions were originally painted, but nearly all the paintings lost. Thus, there could have been, and probably were, hundreds of texts painted on rocks or wood, but they were almost all lost. In other words, see the San Bartolo site. Jenkins is making an unsubstantiated assumption. There we go. Bravissimo. I mean, look at Hamblin grandstanding at its finest. 3 insults in 1 paragraph. Now, hold on, calm down. Dan Peterson holds the record for the most insults to one single opponent, but Hamblin is in a clear second place and powerfully striving here. He says if there were Nephites, they would have left lots of inscriptions. Hamblin says the reality is most ancient people, even those most ancient peoples in the Near East, left no inscriptional evidence of their existence, and here is where I take exception to that. I don't buy it. I think he's playing fast and loose with the evidence. That's a generalization, and it oversimplifies the complex nature of ancient record keeping. So, true now, not all of the ancient peoples left behind extensive inscriptions, but many did, and particularly those in the Near East and the surrounding regions. The Egyptians, their quantity was extensive. Of course, that means hieroglyphic inscriptions, monuments, temples, tombs, and papyri. Of course, we knew that. The Mesopotamians, Sumerians, Akkadians, Babylonians, Assyrians, the quantity of their writings and inscriptions were extensive. We have hundreds of thousands of cuneiform tablets, royal inscriptions, legal documents, and literary texts. Uruk, and Nineveh provide insights into their administrative, legal, and literary activities. With the Hittites, the quantity is more moderate, but there are hieroglyphic and cuneiform inscriptions on monuments and tablets. That is Hattusa, modern Bozakal, Turkey. We learn about political and military history in detail. With the Phoenicians, their inscriptions on stela tombs and pottery is more moderate, but we understand their language and trade networks. For the Greeks, it's rather extensive on stone, decrees, treatises, dedications, pottery, ostraka. The Romans is extensive. They wrote on stone, laws, milestones, funerary inscriptions, bronze, and other materials. The Persians, the Achaemenids, there is a moderate quantity. They inscribed on rock faces, Behistun inscription, the palaces and tombs. The inscriptional evidence and historical documentation, not all cultures did it, but we do know durable materials like stone and clay preserve inscriptions better than perishable materials like wood or papyrus. So Hamblin might have a partial, maybe a tenth of a point with that one. But his idea is that no one left any inscriptions, I just don't buy. And here is what Jenkins says. And here we go again. What Dr. Hamblin does here is precisely what I expected and predicted. Namely, to give me reasons why he cannot produce evidence to support his case rather than actually giving me the evidence. What he is trying to do is to start a debate in which I accept his presuppositions about the lack of evidence with the goal of losing track of the central theme Why can't he produce any evidence whatever? He also shoots himself in both feet in this particular line. He's explaining the lack of Middle East inscription with Mesoamerica. He talks about when the book works entirely in the pre-classic period, and there's no books. The inscriptions are nearly all short, often marginally legible, fragmentary, and often can't be read because of script and language, and that's exactly right. So if the Great Book of Mormon civilization is there, it would be producing hundreds and thousands of more inscriptions. And this is kind of a repeat, because he adds to this. He said, I'm reading your comments as carefully as I can. This is, see, in this debate, there is quite a bit of repeating and reiterating and re-summarizing and all, so bear with me if I do that, but they did it. So this is part of why I had to edit some materials out. I'm trying to keep this as short, straightforward, and to the point as I know how. Jenkins says, I am reading your comment as carefully as I can, but you just misunderstand my question about falsifiability and have not answered it. Oh, and then this is where he asks him personally, what is it that would take for you to lose faith in the Book of Mormon? Okay, you write, fourth, your repeated insistence that there is somehow a parity in quantity and quality between Mesoamerica and the ancient Near East is misinformed. And then Jenkins says, you are dead right to say that the two regions have utterly different historical and archaeological settings. So point for Hamblin, even though it's almost irrelevant. But here's the key, but if the Book of Mormon peoples were there, that would not be true. We would be seeing common languages and cultures, would we not? Ha ha! So the fact of the distinctions you highlight points to there being zero continuity or connection between the two. I am so glad you accept my argument. This is a powerful rejoinder by Jenkins, man. And you've got me doing it again. I am getting caught up in one of your classic evasions, namely telling me why you can't produce evidence and why it doesn't exist and couldn't exist, instead of stepping up and giving me positive evidence. And Hamblin never did. You have a bad habit of claiming that other people say things when they have not. I have never asked for Nephite pottery. So why do you say I have and put the phrase in quotes as if I had? You write your request for Nephite pottery seems extremely naive. Well, you started that particular wild goose chase, and if I used the phrase at all, I was quoting you. Please apologize. Yeah, see, now that's a proper scholarly reaction to you mislabeling and misusing their own words to them. Yeah. See, that kind of misquotation and misattribution is a shoddy way for a serious historian to treat source material and documents. But Mormon apologists have no qualms at all in leaving stuff out or adding extra stuff in order to strengthen their parallels. And it doesn't matter whether they do it to another scholar's writings or to ancient texts. Mormons believe they have the flippant priesthood right, an authority of God, to be able to manipulate anything they want in order to show that they have the truth. Yeah, no joke. And my response to that is simply, anyway, I'm trying to break up the monotony of you guys having to listen to me read all the time. However, I'm not doing it boringly, I don't think. Hey, Geoplanet Jane, thank you for being here. Good to see you, dear. 4 of 6, good to see you. Okay, so let's get back on with it. I appreciate you coming here. Because there, and I'm just now starting to get to the really, really, really good stuff. So, anyway. In my view, your methodological emphasis has only, this is key. Jenkins is on to Hamblin. In my view, your methodological emphasis has only one purpose, which is to distract attention from the core of debate. Amen. And that core of the debate is why you cannot and will not produce any positive evidence to support your cause. The apologist will do this to you every time, man. I speak from experience. I used to be one of them. I'm telling you. So always realize this is the go-to strategy of apologists. Otherwise, they would fall all over themselves to show the evidence that shows the Book of Mormon historicity. Jenkins is exactly right on that, you know. Because think about this. Who wouldn't absolutely love and love and love to show an actual Nephite steel sword, which world scholars agrees is a Nephite steel sword? Who would not want to show that first and foremost? Oh, you want evidence? Nephite steel sword right there. We don't know which Nephite held it or used it, but that's genuinely accepted as a Nephite. They would publish that in every major newspaper in the world. And we know it. But they don't. Now, of course, this assumes the first presidency wouldn't stupidly lock it up in their dumb hidden vault. No, what we get from apologists is only words on why it won't happen. And we're to believe the Book of Mormon is history anyway on vague, sort-of-ish parallels. Anyway, readers of this blog will please note what is happening here. Dr. Hamblin continues to produce treasures from his rich and seemingly inexhaustible arsenal of reasons why there is no worthwhile evidence, or indeed non-worthwhile evidence, to support any claims in the Book of Mormon whatsoever. At no point is he actually producing any positive evidence whatever, and I emphasize that point. All of the bolding in black or the italics is my emphasis. And the reason is simple. He believes in the book as a matter of faith, and this is the other crucial piece. And apologists really do not like to acknowledge this. They have no choice, but they really don't like it when you take it to this issue. So just understand, you're probably going to get your tires slashed and all that kind of stupid crap. They aren't going to like it when you go this way. But Hamblin believes in the book as a matter of faith, but because the events described in it did not take place in the objective, literal, historical world, is the reason why he cannot produce any credible evidence. Therefore, there is no reason why anyone should take any of his claims seriously as real history. That is what they want us to go with. Well, it's real history. But there's no reason to do that if they have no evidence, nor those made by any other person coming from the same stance. He is doing exactly what I predicted he would do. Actually, that does not make me a prophet. He just has no option. Predictable. And I say Jenkins keeps it real, holding Hamblin's feet to the fire. Staying focused is precisely why Jenkins won this debate. Focused on the only thing that matters, where is any actual evidence for the reality of Nephites and or Lamanites? Present it. Prophet Jenkins for president. And now, one of the moments you've all been waiting for. Jenkins destroys Hamblin's methodology entirely. Hamblin on his blog said, this from Professor Jenkins, my comments are added in blue. Bill Hamblin's comments are added in blue. The black ones are Jenkins, the red ones are mine. Following a moment of insight amounting to a conversion experience, I have decided, so this is Jenkins. Following a moment of insight amounting to a conversion experience, I have decided that Dr. Hamblin's argument is mainly correct, and that I am near total agreement with it. What I doubt, though, is whether believers in the Book of Mormon wish to hear that. Let me explain. When our exchanges began, I expected he would be producing supposed historical or archaeological proofs of the objective reality of the Book of Mormon, specifically its claims in the New World, and I would have fun demolishing them. As time has gone on, he has done no such thing. Rather, he has suggested repeatedly that this or that kind of evidence is irrelevant and it does not apply, that the same is true of essentially all attempts at objective proof. No, there won't be inscriptions. No, there is no pottery evidence. Any such attempt at testing or verification is naive, a word he loves. On occasion, he has referred me to Sorensen's book, Mormon's Codex, which similarly offers no concrete objective proofs, but instead offers a lengthy series of supposed and utterly unconvincing parallels. There is not a word there that is vaguely plausible to anyone who is not already thoroughly convinced of the case. In other words, Sorensen wrote his book for already believing Mormons, not the scholarly world to show them the Book of Mormon is real history. That's me paraphrasing what Jenkins meant there. But let's pursue this to its logical conclusion, shall we? What Dr. Hamblin is arguing is simply that no forms of objective proof or evidence should be demanded. Now, Hamblin is taking that from the church leaders, right? Jenkins has his finger on the pulse here. This is important. So let's go to the logical conclusion. Hamblin is arguing is simply that no forms of objective proof or evidence should be demanded for the Book of Mormon's view of the New World because none exist. There's nothing open to examination discussion by historians or scholars, and almost certainly that situation will never change. This is just not a matter for any kind of scholarly examination or discussion. Remember Boyd K. Packer. I distrust those historians. Those pesky fellows want to tell it all. You remember that? He hated feminists, intellectuals, and historians who used their brains. Shame on them all. Anyway, so why should you believe a word of it? I stress that question. Because without such solid objective evidence, why should I or anyone believe a view that is utterly at odds with the views of pretty much the entire academic professional dealing with New World history and archaeology, American history, biblical studies, genetics, linguistics, and so on, not to mention all measures of plausibility? Why should anyone go so very far out on a limb? The answer is simple: faith. Now you know why the church emphasizes faith, right? This is a really important point, you guys. This is really critical because they always emphasize faith. He believes it on religious grounds of faith, from which all follows. As I say, I came close to sharing his view entirely. I agree that no objective evidence exists for the Book of Mormon, not a word, and it never will. While he has not yet said it explicitly, his answer to my persistent requests for one single form of credible proof for any aspect of the Book of Mormon is that no, he will not and never will supply it because none exists. I can hammer as hard as I like on that point, but he will not produce. This is the point where I highlighted, please pay attention here, while his refusal to answer my questions might seem like waffling and prevarication, he really believes that what he is arguing is outside the realm of provable objective fact. It is all a matter of individual faith, which is immune to proof or testing. And I wholeheartedly agree. Yeah, not for a second do I disparage faith. We all live by various forms of faith, but here's the problem. For him, at least, not for me. For me, the total absence of objective evidence for the Book of Mormon's New World poses no difficulty whatsoever because the whole thing is fictitious anyway, right? But he, however, he believes in that whole scenario, but he can offer no objective evidence whatever for its actual existence. No reason other than faith why anyone should believe it. He cannot prove or substantiate a word or even offer a plausible case to any non-believer. What that means is very simple. Nothing Dr. Hamblin says on these matters touches at any point on the world of scholarship, history, or science. It really is, genuinely now, a matter of radical subjective faith. That is a very curious form of apologetics, but this is, as I say, it's his problem, not mine. If I'm wrong on this, well, then he might choose to offer forms of proof or confirmation that we can discuss and verify, but he won't. And Jenkins had him pegged. He didn't either. I was in error when I complained about his insistence on defining our epistemological approaches. What he was not saying overtly was that his argument is wholly based on faith and has no pretenses whatever to objective scholarship or of any kind, historical, archaeological, or any other. Had we known that at the outset, we would have had no argument whatsoever. So, Dr. Hamblin, you are correct. This is a matter for faith, not scholarship, but please don't pretend for a second that this is a scholarly debate. It is not. See, when you examine the ancient Near East, you are a fine and reputable scholar. When you discuss the Book of Mormon, you are an evangelist. How do you reconcile these two roles is a mystery I cannot fathom. Here's Hamblin's response in the blue. I think it might be more fruitful for you to actually ask me what my opinions are rather than speculate. At any rate, I have faith in Jesus Christ, not faith in the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon is there to help us come unto Christ, not for us to have faith in the book in an evangelical sort of bibliolatry. Yeah, now he's just blowing smoke. The fact that you can't understand how I can be a fine and reputable scholar of the Middle East, but a pseudo-cranky scholarly crank on the Book of Mormon, reflects more about you than me. Notice, clever rhetoric. Come on, you got to give him at least a half a point on this, all right? Hamblin gets a half a point for cleverly attempting to flip the tables and make Jenkins into the bad guy. But no cigar, buckaroo, you fail, you're out. Anyway, here's what I say. On a serious note, I would suggest to any and all apologists to simply rehabilitate your cranky pseudo-scholarship and get rid of the two black eyes apologetics has given you permanently by giving the world just one piece of actual physical evidence for the reality of Nephites and or Lamanites. Just a thought. Or admit it's all faith and therefore all your scholarship is a sideshow. Mere eyewash. It's not real and it's certainly not credible. This is a liberating place to arrive at, people. I don't know if you're aware of this or not, but this is absolutely liberating to our souls here. We are now free from the shackles of fiction masquerading about as real history and being forced by the church to believe this, or threatened with eternal loss of heavenly blessings and family and friends. Praise the Lord, this day has come. We are being freed with actual knowledge from Jenkins, away from the pseudo-cranky scholarship, faith pap and pablum of the apologists. It's a really good day. I'm not even kidding. So, Jenkins now asks, 1, do you believe that any or all claims of the New World in the Book of Mormon are supported by any form of objective verifiable evidence? Hamblin answers, of course there is. It's not an ontological problem. It is an epistemological one. What are the criteria by which we can distinguish a Nephite pot, house, or tool from a Mayan pot, house, or tool? And here's what I say. This is where the problem lies. See, this is where they're talking past each other. Jenkins and Hamblin, and it's all Hamblin doing. It is exactly an ontological problem. First, it's very necessary to get to the reality, if there is one, an ontologically existing Nephite, not a vague methodological parallel. Bill by now knows this. His charade is pointless. We're all on to him by now. The second point is the difficulty of finding out how to establish a Nephite or Lamanite artifact is entirely in your camp, not ours. You apologists are making the claim that it's history. Then you prove that to the world scholars. We have no reason to help you figure out how to do that. In other words, we don't give a damn how a Nephite pot would differ from a Mayan. That's your issue, not ours. And until you do that, we have no reason to accept any claims you may make of that text's historicity. Evidence is what gives us reason to believe. No evidence gives us reason to doubt. It's that straightforward. So Hamlin continues trying to wiggle out of it. Now, and here's the part where I told you at the very first of this video. Just please bear with me, because this is critical, if for nothing else, illustration's sake of an apologist snowballing you into oblivion, but you'll get the power of the rejoinder from Jenkins if you'll just bear with me for a few minutes. Notice how intelligent that Hamblin makes all of this sound. I'm serious. His overwhelming knowledge of such Mesoamerican minutiae is seriously impressive. It blows my mind, but he still doesn't have anything establishing the Book of Mormon as history. Okay? But I'm going to read through this. Okay? Hold on. I got to get a drink of water. I mean, Hamlin lays it on. He wants to show he is superior scholar number one, baby. Check this out. There are around 50 Maya emblem glyphs found in classic Maya inscriptions. Of course, more could be discovered. They are symbolic of the city, state, or land, generally attached to the title Maya Aha, pronounced Aha, meaning Lord or King. Well, some of these cities are known from glyphs alone. Their precise location is unknown. Some are logographic, that is purely symbolic. Others have a phonetic component. Several emblem glyphs seem to be mythical. Perhaps half a dozen are attested before 400 AD, the end of the Book of Mormon civilization. The pronunciation of many of these is unknown, and for many others is uncertain. These 50 emblem glyphs are our only source of place names, that is, toponyms, for Book of Mormon times. This compares with thousands of toponyms found in ancient Near Eastern sources. It should also be noted that place names change through time. This does occur in the Book of Mormon. Ether 683, Hill Rama to Hill Cumorah, for instance. Classic examples are Byzantium to Constantinople to Istanbul to Jerusalem to Aelia Capitolina to Quds. Changes in place names usually occurs in times of major political or cultural upheaval. The pronunciation of emblem glyphs also undoubtedly varied between dialects, through time, and with non-Maya languages. It is also not uncommon for different cultures to have different toponyms, that is, place names, or ethnonyms, that is, ethnic names, for the same place or peoples. The Greeks, for example, gave Greek names to all Egyptian cities. In other words, the Egyptian Unu was called Heliopolis by the Greeks. There is no phonetic relationship. An example is the English ethnonym German. German equals Deutsche. Allemande, Italian Tedesco, Russian Nemetsky, Finnish Saxe, Medieval Hebrew Ashkenaz, Lithuanian Volkiske. Note, the linguists with fragmentary data like we have formed the Maya would have absolutely no way to know that all of these names refer to precisely the same German people. It is very likely that the peoples the Nephites called Lamanites did not use that name for themselves. And here I say, whoa, that's ridiculous. Of course they called each other this. One has to read the Book of Mormon first to see that, however. How else did that designation arise? Duh. When he says it's unlikely, or it's very likely, that the people the Nephites called Lamanites did not use that name for themselves. In the Book of Mormon, the terms Nephite and Lamanite are indeed used internally to describe different groups of people. These terms originated from the names of two brothers, Nephi and Laman. This is Mormon, Book of Mormon 101, you guys, who were sons of the prophet Nephi. The Nephites are descendants of Nephi. He was righteous, and so were they. The Lamanites were descendants of Laman, Nephi's elder brother. They rejected the teachings, and they became wicked. Throughout the Book of Mormon, these terms are consistently used to distinguish between the two groups. The narrative frequently mentions conflicts, alliances, and interactions between the Nephites and Lamanites, highlighting the ongoing relationships and tension. The origin, the names, Nephite and Lamanite, derived directly from Nephi and Laman. Of course, that's in the context of the Book of Mormon themselves. These terms do not come from external sources, but are introduced and used internally within the narrative to describe the descendants and followers of these two brothers. My gosh, the identification of Nephites and Lamanites as such is an integral part of the Book of Mormon narrative, the terms originating from the names of key figures within the text. Anyway, on and on and on. So I disagree with Hamblin on that, but he continues. So back to Bill Hamblin. So, given the extraordinarily sparse and ambiguous data we possess, it is very difficult to try to identify Book of Mormon place names through inscriptional Maya emblem glyphs, our only source of contemporary data. Well, Jenkins maintains that this fact is somehow evidence against the historicity of the Book of Mormon. It is not. I maintain rather that the lack of data means that no significant conclusion can be drawn regarding the Book of Mormon place names. Lack of data is not data. My response to this? No, it's lack of information and evidence of the historicity of the text. If there is no evidence, there is no reason to accept the extraordinary claim that the Book of Mormon is history. Having faith doesn't transform it into history either. Until said evidence comes forth, we are justified in not accepting your extraordinary claim. It is evidence that gives fundamental historic reality, not faith. It's why we know with assurance that Hezekiah was king of Judah and was attacked by Sennacherib in his Assyrian invasion in 701 BC, destroying the vast majority of Judah. Both biblical and Assyrian records share information of the same event, the same people, at the same time, in the same location, and the same result. That is evidence that establishes historicity. Not some vague name from 1500 BC confirming another name in another area in 400 AD that kind of sounds like a Book of Mormon name. Now, if you think I'm just making this stupid stuff up, Hamblin, shockingly enough, really does do this as a piece of evidence. And I'll show it to you tonight. I'm serious. So Hamblin says, without data, the question cannot be examined or answered in any meaningful way. The Book of Mormon doesn't fail the test because there is insufficient evidence to undertake a test. There is no test to fail. And my response is, then there is no history to believe. It's not wicked to disbelieve. It is rational at this point. Hamblin says, if we had hundreds or better, thousands of pre-classic toponyms, a significant examination could be undertaken. But we don't. Note that the problem in this regard is methodological, epistemological, and hermeneutical, exactly as I said. It is not about objective evidence. My response is it's about the entire lack of objective evidence that is the reason no one has to accept the extraordinary claim the Book of Mormon is historical. And our disbelief is justified precisely due to that lack of historical evidence for the historicity of the Book of Mormon. Hamblin continues, whenever anyone demands objective evidence for historical questions, you know you're dealing with a hermeneutical and epistemological misunderstanding or naivete. I say ridiculous. Anyone asking for evidence is naive. Oh, the vanity of apologists here. But notice this makes Bill feel superior once again, even though he knows he's lost this entire argument. So back to Hamblin. History in the sense of the actual human past does not exist. It cannot be directly observed. You cannot experiment upon it by giving Napoleon an extra division of infantry to see if he could win the Battle of Waterloo. History is a non-empirical discipline, and anything that is non-empirical cannot be objective. There is, of course, in the study of the philosophy of science, a significant debate as to the degree to which even empirical and experimental disciplines can be objective. But that's a different question. Be that as it may, history clearly is not empirical. Thus, the demand for objective evidence represents a fundamental misunderstanding of both the nature of the human past and our ability today to understand it. When turning to the Book of Mormon, there are at least 4 layers of interpretation that we must undertake in order to understand the questions of the historicity of the Book of Mormon. And I respond, ugh. Yes, let's wade through this and give Bill his say. It does end up strengthening Jenkins' argument all the more for the time we give Bill, so it's worth it. So my question is, are you guys ready up for this? Here we go. I'm going to read what it really takes to truly understand the historicity of the Book of Mormon. Number 1, according to Hamblin, we must correctly interpret the Book of Mormon. This is, of course, the fundamental problem, since many of those critiquing the Book of Mormon have either not read the book or they have read the book in a completely superficial manner, meaning that they didn't come to the same belief and understanding that the apologists do, which is a joke. And furthermore, are not familiar with how modern LDS scholars of ancient Book of Mormon studies understand the text. See, if you don't agree with the modern LDS scholars, then you ain't got spit. The arrogance here is astonishing. It's pointless to argue against an interpretation of the Book of Mormon, which no LDS scholar believes. Note there are also many non-professional LDS interpretations of the Book of Mormon, the Heartland theory, for example, which must not be conflated with scholarly LDS studies. I say pure silly. See, now it's my turn to intimidate. One does not have to spend years in learning the Book of Mormon to ask for evidence of it. And all other theories are non-professional except the Mesoamerican ones. Oh my goodness. The arrogance, I say. So the third item, according to Bill Hamblin, is we must correctly understand and interpret Mesoamerican evidence. None of this is objective. Now, this is Hamblin's. Since I am not an expert on Mesoamerican studies, for this I rely entirely on Mesoamerican experts. Note that it is perfectly legitimate to use their interpretations of Mesoamerica for part 2 of this process, without accepting their generally completely uninformed interpretations of the Book of Mormon. Nothing in my interpretation of the Book of Mormon requires me to reject any affirmative claims of Mesoamericanists. In other words, if I like what they say and it supports the Book of Mormon, I'll accept it. If they contradict the Book of Mormon, I will reject it. I mean, how convenient, right? For example, I don't debate their dating of archaeological sites, their interpretations of inscriptions, or their understandings of the Mesoamerican calendar. Note, on the other hand, there are many issues in dispute among Mesoamericanists, just as there are in any discipline. And I say absolutely, fundamentally irrelevant. According to a competing theory, since Hamblin's Mesoamerican theory has not won the day, is the Book of Mormon happened in the United States. And so Mesoamerica is an entire waste of time. There is nothing necessary about learning everything you can about Mesoamerica until we have evidence the Book of Mormon is there. The Heartland theory vies and competes for attention, much to the chagrin of the Mesoamerican apologists. Well, who is correct? That's the task of apologists, not for the rest of us. But Hamblin simply waving his hand and trying to get rid of the Heartland theory like that? No, you got to refute them and make your case to them as well as to the rest of us unbelievers in the world. Man, have you got your work cut out for you. And we must correctly understand and interpret the ancient Near Eastern evidence. Essentially, this is the same issue as number 2 above, but with a different data set. See, this has been a more fruitful path for Book of Mormon scholars, since there is far more evidence from the ancient Near East than from pre-classic Mesoamerica. And I say there is not one single item from the ancient Near East which establishes the reality of the Lehi of the Book of Mormon, let alone Sariah, Laman, Lemuel, Sam, Nephi, Jacob, Enos, Alma. Pick any name you want in the Book of Mormon than there is in Mesoamerica. In neither place is any one Book of Mormon person ever established and identified as real. Hamblin's blowing smoke here as well. Then he continues, we must attempt to understand the possible relationships between scholarly interpretations of the Book of Mormon and the Mesoamerican and the ancient Near Eastern data. And it's this final phase, the most important and difficult one, can only begin once phases 1 through 3 have been conducted. And note, here we go again, look how superior these guys are. LDS scholars only have engaged in all 4 phases of interpretation. Therefore, you need to believe us and rely on us. We know, you don't. See, the methodological and hermeneutic imperative is that we engage in all 4 phases if we wish to discuss the question of the historicity of the Book of Mormon. And I say we don't have to read anything Mormon scholars produce until a base reality of the Book of Mormon, Nephites, Lamanites, is established first. This is a waste of time if no evidence exists demonstrating its reality. The Mormon apologists are just laughably wrong-headed here. First, the evidence for establishing its real history. Then we learn all of your weird and outdated materials, since an actual item of evidence actually is going to outdate a lot of your guessing you've done in all your meanderings of writings. So Hamblin continues, the phonetic pronouncement of many, perhaps most of the Maya proper names in glyph inscriptions is generally uncertain and often unknown. Very important. When phonetic data is provided in the glyphs, their ancient pronunciation is often an educated based on modern Maya pronunciation. He meant an educated guess based on modern Maya pronunciation. There are many dialects of modern Maya, and there is no reason to assume that ancient Maya was not pronounced as differently from modern Maya as Old Anglo-Saxon was pronounced differently from modern English. Hence, the pre-classic pronunciation of many city names, glyphs, emblems, and royal names is often unknown and often very hypothetical. And I say, you're making yourself sound awful intelligent, but showing your argument is awfully stupid if none of this matters for evidence of the Book of Mormon historicity. Another rabbit trail, hey, Bill? While you deal in often very hypotheticals, archaeology in the Old World has exactly pinpointed and proven at least one instance of King Hezekiah of Judah was real and did what the Bible say he did. His archenemy, the mighty king of Assyria, Sennacherib, is also proven to have invaded Judah and laid waste to all of it except Jerusalem. The Lachish archaeology of this is breathtakingly, stunningly accurate. The actual ramp the Assyrians built up to the city wall actually still exists. We can see it for ourselves. We have exact item. We have exact correct spot. We have exact same time. We have precise place geographically with archaeologically discovered arrowheads and sling rocks with it all, proving that there was a siege by the Assyrians against Lachish. We even have the evidence it was burned at that time, exactly as both records, the biblical and the Assyrian record, indicate and say that it was burned. History has been demonstrated with evidence from both sides. The sacred Bible, the secular, the Assyrian inscriptions, which were written by Sennacherib himself, by his own hand upon the tailor prism of baked clay, mind you, specifically also noting what Hezekiah did, so there is no guessing in any manner of any kind. There is no hope or faith that this could or might or may be Hezekiah. There is knowledge, and there is exact identity. It is Hezekiah, king of Judah. This is not dealing in vague, wispy parallels of someone somewhere, somewhen called Cynic Barkib, found, say, 500 years before 701 BC. And this name looks pretty close and sounds kind of roughly the same as Sennacherib of 701 BC. So we can count this as a hit, like you do with the Book of Mormon onomastica. No, we've got exact bullseyes, and you don't. Hamblin continues. Only dozen or two Maya personal names are attested in pre-400 AD inscriptions. We need to emphasize that there is probably several thousand times more textual information about classic Maya as pre-classic. Here is a list in alphabetical order of the major Maya city-states. Their names are often colonial rather than ancient, for which we have sufficient inscriptional evidence to create a king list of sorts. I'll include the date of the earliest royal names known from these inscriptions. I'm not going to read all this stuff. Let me just show you what he's doing. Talk about a snow job. Good God. Kalakmul, 6th century, Karakol, 1 mid-4th century king, Kopontis, Das Pilus, 7, Naranjo, 6, Pedro Negros, Palenque, Kariga, Tikal, Donina. I asked no Zarahemla, Bill. You notice all those place names, there's no Zarahemla. Note that only 3 of the 11 great cities have royal names. What in the hell does this matter? Karakol, Tikal, foliated jaguar. They don't even know the year. AD 90? Who knows? Guesswork. 2nd and 3rd century AD? Who knows? It's guessing. 2nd and 3rd century AD? Who knows? They're guessing. I'm on a, Yashalan, Yo At, Yo Pat Bala, Shield Jaguar, Bird Jaguar. So I asked, no Alma, Nephi, King Benjamin, or Helaman yet, Bill? No Samuel the Lamanite? No Gedoni? What's the point of all of this noise? Well, here's what he's trying to say, I guess. Thus, from all the New World, we have the names of 12 kings before 400 AD. That is a remarkable sparse database to work with. Basically, we have insufficient information from inscriptional archaeology. He sounds like a broken record, doesn't he? Here's why we can't make a test of the Book of Mormon, because there isn't enough stuff to do it with. And there's plenty of archaeological evidence to show there's many important cities and kingdoms in pre-classic times. We simply don't know the names of those cities or kings. So the problem is not the Book of Mormon somehow fails this test. There is insufficient data to undertake the test. So what fails then is Bill's interpretation of saying the Book of Mormon is actual history. Maybe that assumption is what has failed. But you can't ask an apologist to go that far. It'll freak them out, man. They'll light their hair on fire and run around singing Kumbaya, expecting the second coming of Christ or something. That'll completely freak them out. Here's what I say. And that nothing you presented is evidence for the Book of Mormon with what you have, as Jenkins has noted time and again. In other words, no, you cannot produce just one item of evidence the Book of Mormon is history. We get it. For Pete's sake, you've demonstrated that in a dozen posts. At this point now, interesting in this debate, at this point, John Gee shared some stuff that distracted from the point the apologists have no evidence yet for the Book of Mormon historicity. And how he did that was he lamely suggested that there is no archaeological evidence for the Council of Nicaea, then why expect some for the Book of Mormon? Silliness like this rabbit hole prevails in the Mormon apologetic camp. So anyway, we can safely ignore John Gee just like we do in the Book of Abraham junk. Hamlin continues, in his number 13, Jenkins writes, so if the Great Book of Mormon civilization is there, why is it not producing hundreds and thousands more inscriptions in Hebrew, Reformed Egyptian, etc.? It sort of suggests that civilization isn't there, right? Hamlin says this. Notice that this is a question of expectation, not evidence. Again, it is an epistemological and methodological question, not an empirical one. The problem here is that a book shouldn't be evaluated on what you expect, hope, or wish the evidence for or against it should be, but on what the actual evidence is. If there is insufficient evidence for one particular line of analysis, the methodologically proper response is to take another approach, not to declare the case closed. So here's my question. It's patently obvious that the archaeological approach has given you nothing for the Book of Mormon. So what other lines have apologists brought out showing something in favor of the Book of Mormon that has demonstrated to the world's scholars that it's actual history? Have you pursued other lines that give us evidence, say DNA, mythology, folklore, what? Linguistics, geography, geology, anything at all? We have nothing from any lines that the apologists have pursued for an obvious reason. There is no evidence for the Book of Mormon history in any lines of inquiry. But your deflection is once again duly noted. Here Hamblin is continuing to confuse the matter, desperately trying to buy time. I'm going to read all this because the response magnifies the inability of the apologist to handle the issue. But sometimes you got to wade through the sewer of obfuscation to really see the bright point. And when you see it, it's unforgettable. So, most ancient civilizations did not produce much inscriptional evidence. Many, perhaps most, have left no inscriptional evidence whatsoever. I remember vividly visiting Bronze Age Merv in Turkmenistan. It was a huge site, bigger than most Middle Eastern Bronze Age sites I visited. I wandered through looking at burials, pottery, walls, houses, temples, etc. It was obviously a huge city and a great civilization, yet not a single text has been found on the site. We know nothing of the name, the language, the religion, the kings, etc. of this great civilization, and I say I have shown above where numerous literate civilizations have left inscriptions, though there are always exceptions. We agree to that. The Nephites were very literate, to the point of Joseph Smith claiming there were wagons and wagons of plates with writings on them in the cave in the hill Cumorah near his house. This is literally tons of writing, Bill. It is incoherent nonsense to suppose they only ever wrote on those plates, and literally nothing else as far as the eye could see. Literate people leave inscriptions behind, period. If none are found, our skepticism is entirely justified until such evidence does turn up, regardless of how difficult it is for you guys to figure out how to produce that evidence. So Hamlin continues, ancient Israel has produced very little inscriptional evidence. If John Gee reviews it, you can't believe it, so be careful. Anyway, not a single inscription survives for David or Solomon, the two greatest kings of Israel. Are we therefore to conclude, as Jenkins would have us, that it sort of suggests that David and Solomon weren't there, right? In fact, that is precisely the response of the biblical minimalists to this fact. Now, my response is, I am not a minimalist, personally. But yes, until some evidence actually shows up outside the biblical record for their reality, then it isn't verified. And therefore, actually, there is no reason to believe that they were real. That's exactly what that shows us. That is a rational response. No evidence, no reality. What part of that can't you grasp yet? You think labeling people answers that, Bill Hamblin? You're being ridiculous. We are entirely justified in not believing in something historical if there is no evidence for it. You can't grasp that? It is really quite that simple. You seem terrified that if the Book of Mormon is not history, then it has no value. Why is that? That's a fascinating thing. So Hamblin continues. The reality is, most ancient peoples, places, and events have no inscriptional evidence to support their existence. I don't know why Jenkins expects it to be otherwise. I respond, because of the unhistorical claim that the Nephites were bilingually literate, Bill. Literate people usually left records, as archaeology has demonstrated with actual evidence. We have literally nothing for the Book of Mormon, literarily, historically, archaeologically, architecturally, or really. The Book of Mormon peoples hung out with and associated with literate people on both sides of the world, if the Book of Mormon itself is accurate. They even took literary biblical records with them. The brass plates actually is a silly anachronism. We'll leave that for another video on another day. But they took those to their new world, presumably, to copy, to spread, and to share with others. So no one commented, discussed, shared, or added to the written records for over 1,000 years. Is that honestly what you expect us to think? I suspect you can do better than this. How many other lines of inquiry have failed to produce evidence of Nephites? All of them, so far as the evidence shows. You know, to quote Jenkins, that kind of shows they weren't there, doesn't it? It is duly noted that you continue to fail to produce anything for the historicity of the Book of Mormon in any line of inquiry whatsoever, though. So Hamblin continues. During most of the Book of Mormon period, most inscriptions were painted on wood, stucco, or stone. In the Mesoamerican environment, wood and stucco decay, and paint fades and is washed off. Some suggest that the rise of carved stone inscriptions, which were all once painted as well, although little paint survives, arose precisely when kings began to notice that the inscriptions of their ancestors painted on wood, stucco, and stone were decaying and disappearing. So they therefore decided to make their new inscriptions more permanent by carving them in stone. Well, this proves that these guys damn sure weren't Nephites, doesn't it? Because the Nephites knew all about carving their words in metal plates so they would last forever. Hamblin wants us to think this has a parallel to the Book of Mormon. This is nothing like the Book of Mormon. The Book of Mormon peoples began knowing how to make their records permanent on metal plates. Hamblin doesn't see the problem because he's so blinded by his own apologetic claptrap. So that's just off the top of my head. This is my actual response. Oh, more excuses, no actual evidence. You make the claims to show us the goods. But do notice how he continues to try and overwhelm us with so much historical knowledge of Mesoamerica. Whoa, man. There just has to be something to this, doesn't there? See, it's almost as if he's trying to show, hey, look at how smart I am. Therefore, the Book of Mormon is true after all. Because even a smart guy will believe in the Book of Mormon, right? So anyway, Hamblin continues. Pre-classic sites are far less well represented than classic sites for a number of reasons. A, they're simply more classic sites. B, the classic strata was always about the pre-classic strata. Under many of the great classic temples and palaces in Mesoamerica, there are often pre-classic levels, but the entire classic temple would have been removed to expose it. Generally, unless the site was abandoned in pre-classic times, the pre-classic strata can be seen only in small blocks or trenches where the archaeologists dug deeper to that level to establish pottery typology. C, there is a bias among archaeologists toward the classic period, which is generally larger and more magnificent. D, just like everywhere else in the world, archaeology in Central America is not done for purely academic reasons. reasons. The tourist imperatives drives Mexican archaeology. People come to Tikal because the classic ruins are so magnificent. The Guatemalan government is simply not going to allow Mesoamerican archaeologists to tear down a Tikal temple to expose the less magnificent ruins underneath it, even if an archaeologist could raise funding to do so. The same thing happens in Israeli archaeology, but in reverse. Post-Israel layers on archaeology sites are generally completely striped away to expose the biblical layer, essential for nationalistic and for tourist reasons. Oh my God. This is also totally irrelevant to actually showing us something demonstrating the historicity of the Book of Mormon. Bill Hamblin, is it any wonder you absolutely got thrashed in this debate? There's no question in any of our minds. He's not done yet. He continues. Well, international destruction of the inscriptions of former rulers is quite common in Mesoamerica. So while Jenkins might expect us to find lots of inscriptions to provide us the information we need to make a judgment on the historicity of the Book of Mormon, the reality is we find what we find, no more no less. Alas, the evidence is what it is, not what Jenkins expects or wants it to be. Jenkins appears to think this is irrational special pleading on my part to explain away the lack of the evidence for the Book of Mormon. I think it is simply the methodologically sound approach to the data. That's because you don't have any evidence for the Book of Mormon. So, of course, you're taking this ridiculous stance. We can see right through your plan, Bill. My response, no evidence, no belief, regardless of how it disappeared. For a very simple reason. Extraordinary claims have to have the same kind of evidence or justification for unbelief in the claims is 100% justified. Jenkins returns now, and this is good because Jenkins is starting to, Jenkins is realizing, you know what? He's acting like a high schooler. I'm going to destroy his arguments. His whole methodology is just ludicrous. He exposes the apologetic fatal assumption to all debate and evidence. So Jenkins says Dr. Hamblin has specified his ground rules for any debate over Book of Mormon history in terms that I view as irresponsible and unacceptable. And this is the link to where you can go. I've got a link for you in the description where Jenkins has collected absolutely every one of the back and forth responses in this debate, and it's all conveniently located in one solid spot. You can find that in the description. So in response, I, Philip Jenkins, will present my own assumptions about methodology. I think this is where Jenkins really starts destroying the credibility of all Mormon thinking. Seriously. It's deadly. This is a substantial post, and it is. But the reason he came out like this is because of the idiotic way that Bill is trying to overwhelm him with his intellectual superior knowledge about Mesoamerican Maya triviality that has nothing to do with the Book of Mormon, either in time or place, or linguistic, or archaeological, or historical reality. And so Jenkins is saying, look, let's get down to the brass tacks here. And this is substantial, and that's all the more valuable that it makes this. I've got to read this. We are getting educated tonight. That is why you keep coming back to the Backyard Professor, because I deliver actual good knowledge and education. I don't fart around. I get to it. So here is what we are talking about. I initially based this discussion on something you said in our debate concerning falsifiability. You wrote, Jenkins asks about the question of falsifiability. So I'll set aside the problem that this is really a methodology issue for empirical and experimental science, which doesn't really work with non-empirical historical questions. And this is where he said it right here at this site. So I will return to that very significant quotation from you shortly. So you, Bill Hamblin, then proceed to apply the issue to one limited and very specific topic in the area of personal names. But the best test of falsifiability for the Book of Mormon, Bill Hamblin says, would be the absence of Book of Mormon names in the corpus of pre-classic inscriptions. If we had, say, phonetic readings for several thousand personal and place names in the pre-classic Mesoamerica and found no Book of Mormon names, that would be problematic for the Book of Mormon. However, we have no such lists, so no problem. So that's all right then. Jenkins manhandles this. This statement is utterly revealing in multiple ways. Primarily, it shows that you are completely ignoring the far more critical question, namely whether there is any evidence whatever for the existence of any of the peoples mentioned in the Book of Mormon in the New World at any place or at any time. Throughout, and I've emphasized this, throughout you are assuming that presence. And because of that assumption, you are then working to discredit any form of disproof that might be offered of your assumption. Now, I did not initially recognize that rhetorical technique because it is so completely odd to me, and I would say to any standard form of argumentation. You are, so to speak, going to stage 12 of an argument without passing through the prior 11 steps that constitute the essential foundation for that conclusion. To you, questions and arguments about testing and verifying might seem inappropriate or irrelevant or naive, your favorite pet word, but they are absolutely not so to anyone who is not already a thoroughgoing believer in the historicity of the Book of Mormon. Throughout, you are assuming rather than testing or proving, or indeed thinking that testing and proving might be worthwhile or necessary activities. You are making that assumption of truth, assuming that the Book of Mormon scenario is correct, which is extremely far-fetched for anyone not already convinced of the religious views that you espouse. Those religious views, moreover, are the sole and solitary ground for believing that historical and archaeological hypothesis, because you do not acknowledge that point, and you, Bill Hamblin, don't even appear to understand it. You are left concluding that anyone who disputes your position must either be ignorant or suffering from religious bigotry. This is where the anger and the rudeness and the nasty, caustic, arrogant attitude of Mormon apologists come from. They are not testing. They are simply starting from the answer. Man, how many times have I said that in my Book of Abraham videos, for instance? Yeah? Jenkins has this. Jenkins really has this down pat. I will return to these points, he said, but just as damaging to any case Dr. Hamblin may make are his comments on falsifiability and the nature of evidence. There are several points which strike me as critically important, and I'm going to divide this discussion into 6 major headings, and this is so important. It's long, but here we begin to get powerful, useful knowledge on how to deal with apologetics. 1, what archaeologists do, testing and proving, making and testing extraordinary claims, deal breakers, does any objective evidence support your case, why you will not and cannot produce any objective verifiable evidence. Number 1, what archaeologists do. It greatly disturbs me that you do not acknowledge that falsifiability must be a basic element of any argument about these matters, and that you dismiss the question so peremptorily. It really suggests to me that you do not begin to understand the issues at stake, nor again do you understand how academic disciplines work. Ouch. Now Jenkins gets to turn the tables at intimidating Hamblin, eh? Jenkins continues, you say that falsifiability is a methodology issue for empirical experimental science, which doesn't really work with non-empirical historical questions. Well, if you talk to your friends in archaeology, they will tell you firmly and definitively that theirs is indeed a true science that practices empirical and experimental methodologies and knows the concept of falsifiability very well indeed. I would confidently expect no less of the gaggle of first-rate scholars based at BYU and certainly the Mesoamericanists. Here is one of the critical points about what archaeologists do, and by understanding this, we can cut through a lot of the extraneous malarkey apologists throw at us when we're dealing with archaeology, given the absence or paucity of written texts. Any discussion of the Book of Mormon's New World scenarios is necessarily archaeological rather than historical. How can anyone dispute that? Therefore, falsifiability is actually an essential component of any claim or argument. If it does not meet the most stringent scientific criteria, then such a claim need not be considered in this context. See, in one of your recent posts, you make some startling remarks on matters of methodology and academic study, and then he puts the post, the centrality of hermeneutics. Specifically, you say, we must correctly understand and interpret Mesoamerican evidence. None of this is objective. That's what Hamblin said. Jenkins says, I will repeat that for any reader who does not believe he or she saw the words correctly. None of this is objective. That's Bill Hamblin. Well, Jenkins says this is so absolutely at odds with anything taught or practiced in any Mesoamerican studies or archaeological unit that I honestly wonder what spiral arm of the galaxy you are inhabiting. This is utterly incorrect at every point. It is wildly insulting to anyone who practices that highly credible and reputable discipline. In the same post, you also apply that principle to ancient Near Eastern archaeology and history. That is at least what I understand from your remark that, quote, we must correctly understand and interpret ancient Near Eastern evidence, essentially the same issue as number 2 above, but with a different data set, unquote. You also say history is a non-empirical discipline, and anything that is non-empirical cannot be objective. Phil Jenkins says, as I say, this is absurd. This is the kind of thing you might get from an undergraduate who has wandered into a postmodern seminar in English literature, preferably one taught by somebody who got their degrees in the late 1980s when this kind of thing was in vogue. But assume for the sake of argument the point about history is true. In contrast, archaeology clearly and emphatically is an empirical discipline, and any attempt to understand the Book of Mormon scenario must be archaeological, that is, empirical and experimental. Seriously, Bill, I would love to hear a response to your comments about the disciplines from one of these skilled archaeologists who holds the LDS faith, whether at BYU or elsewhere, and whether they work on Mesoamerica or the ancient Near East. Do they believe this foolishness, this meshugas? Do they believe that they are practicing a humanities discipline based entirely on subjective and individual perceptions devoid of any scientific content? The answer, of course, is they don't. Or if they do, they're in the wrong profession. So let me see. You have terminally offended the history department, the archaeology department, and the evasions. If you want to see the kind of authentically empirical and experimental research I'm referring to, I would point to the extensive and thoroughly credible work done on establishing the origins of a nation or people called Israel in the Judean highlands of the late Bronze, early Iron Age by fine scholars such like Israel Finkelstein, And I respond, I would add William G. Deaver, Amahai Mazar, and Zioni Zevit, among others, to this list. See, this is an excellent analogy for anything potentially relating to the Book of Mormon, because these scholars were likewise trying to trace and identify an ethnic group in a particular landscape. So the analogy is apples to apples here. Later on, when Jenkins absolutely wipes out poor young Neil Rapelye, he shows it's an apples to oranges. Here it's apples to apples. Judean research was incontestably falsifiable, refutable, and or testable. That's why it made it good archaeological science, okay, in Israel. So I also referred to the splendid work done in recent decades in the United States Southwest among the communities and networks of what were once called the Anasazi, the ancestral Pueblones. As in the Judean case now, one major focus is on the identification of ethnic and linguistic groups in particular landscapes and how they have changed and developed over time. Who were these people? What were their social and cultural arrangements? What can we say about their political structures? How do those historic groups relate to modern day peoples in the region? And I emphasize this, in no case can we draw on any contemporary written texts, so our methodologies are wholly archaeological. Southwestern archaeologists, they form hypotheses about the nature of these bygone communities. They go off and they test them. Then they formulate new and more precise hypotheses in light of the new findings. Now, this is in the best scientific mode. The work here is very definitively empirical and experimental in nature, and it is founded in that holy scholarly trinity of falsifiability, refutable, and or testable. That is what scientists do. That is what archaeologists do. And that is unquestionably what archaeologists who profess the LDS faith do. They would all be awfully surprised to know that what they are dealing with is not objective, as Bill Hamblin says. If we ever, excuse me, if we ever were to have a region or a series of archaeological sites that anyone was to claim as related to the Book of Mormon accounts, these are the methodologies and approaches that would be used to examine and verify them. Those methodologies must of necessity be falsifiable, refutable, and or testable. As I've said, we never have had any such vague, plausible candidates, and in my view, we never will. But those are the criteria that must be employed when we do. So the total absence of any such potential sites is your problem, Mormon apologists. It's not ours. It's not mine. It is indeed a fatal problem for any argument you might make on this subject. We agree. So the second thing is testing and proving. As a social historian, I do a lot of expert witness work in courts. The reason lawyers are able to use my expertise is that I treat history as a social science, fulfilling the so-called Daubert standard, which I described here. Outliers and Iconoclast on his website. The first and indispensable criteria in this list is empirical testing. That is, whether the theory or the technique is falsifiable, refutable, and or testable. And the second criterion is whether it has been subjected to peer review and publication. Well, as you imagine, a great deal of case law exists on these matters. They're thoroughly familiar, not just within the legal world, but within the realm of science of all kinds. So if you object that peer review in and of itself does not guarantee quality or accuracy, you are correct. I would entirely agree with you. But what it does do for us and why it is so necessary is it establishes a minimal floor of credibility and plausibility below which we should never descend. So these are the standards. that I have all along insisted that we should and we must use in our debates, and which I would apply to any and all potential claims or statements that are advanced in support of the Book of Mormon's historicity. Now, the main point is the existence of the alleged peoples in the Book of Mormon scenario is emphatically not a non-empirical historical question like Bill Hamblin claims. If they are to pass muster as scholarship, then any statements concerning this matter must be falsifiable, refutable, and or testable. So Bill Hamblin, his whole philosophy is just bunk when it comes to ancient history. So to witness these best practices in operation, one book I admire in matters of Old Testament historicity is Lester L. Grab, Ancient Israel, What Do We Know and How Do We Know It? And this is a 2007 book, so it's not really that old. I mean, it's closing in on 20 years, 17 years old, so what? Now, the book is far from unique in this way. It has extremely high critical standards that are a familiar part of that discipline, but it happens to be a title I've been reading recently. On every page, you see how demanding are Grab's critical standards, his zeal to test and verify every morsel of potential data according to the most rigorous scientific standards. He assesses the history by means of the archaeology and the archaeology by means of the history. Now, for him, archaeology is an empirical discipline par excellence. Obviously, Grab is highly critical of conventional assumptions about the history reported in the Bible, but even so, you can't read his book without being overwhelmed by the incredible array of data that we have to play with in that region as against the total black hole that is the story of the Book of Mormon peoples in the New World. Somehow, all sorts of evidence, and by that we mean inscriptions, pottery, metalwork, texts, these survived to be examined in the Southern Levant, while they evidently did not in the Book of Mormon's New World. Work all you want to account for the difference. There's only one credible explanation, namely that the supposed Book of Mormon peoples never existed. If you want to see the difference between real scholarship and ancient Book of Mormon studies, there is no finer place to start. To the best of my knowledge, I've never seen apologist work in ancient Book of Mormon studies that comes close to meeting these criteria, or indeed shows any awareness of these criteria. In my view, again, such rigor is totally and conspicuously absent from John Sorensen's monumental Mormon's Codex book, which is pervasively anecdotal and impressionistic. As the phrase goes, the plural of anecdote is not data. So, if you believe that comment is unfair or inaccurate, then I assume you will cite examples that challenge my statements. If you further believe that a particular apologist work meets those standards, then I would ask to know what it is. I stress these criteria, and particularly their origins, so that you and your readers can see that I'm not inventing them out of whole cloth, not at all. I'm in no sense trying to invent special rules to apply to the Book of Mormon that I would not apply to other topics or eras. These are fundamental principles of science in general and of social science in particular. So, I am at number 3. And I am going to ask my audience a question. Oh, some of you are still here. Do you want me to keep going? I'm at almost 2.5 hours, and I am not even halfway through tonight. And there's no way I'm going to go to 5 hours tonight. I'm too tired, and I've got to work tomorrow, which is so unfortunate. Yes, please hit the like and hit the subscribe. And please come back to the video and drop some comments in on what you thought, because comments also help my algorithm. But yes, I've been trying to go through this fast and yet trying to make it interesting and useful. So you do want me to keep going a little bit? Okay, I'll keep going for another 15 or 20 minutes, and then I'll come back and ask you if I can quit yet. You're not going to let me quit just yet, I can see. So, okay, let's keep going, because we are in one of the absolute most important aspects of the whole kit and caboodle from Jenkins' point of view. Making and testing extraordinary claims. The point about standards of evidence is so important for this reason. I've said that the account of the New World in the Book of Mormon is a view that is utterly at odds with the views of pretty much the entire academic profession dealing with the New World history or the archaeology. Doesn't even matter if it's American history, biblical studies, genetics, linguistics, so on. You might not like the fact, but I hope you'll agree that mainstream academy has no time whatever for the approaches of the ancient Book of Mormon studies. You yourself have written, you, Bill Hamblin, you have written that the Book of Mormon receives almost no serious attention by pre-Columbian scholars. And you're largely right. In fact, I would say receives absolutely no attention from them, because the scholarly consensus is not just overwhelming, it's total. And it's totally opposed to your worldview. In other words, you have not established the basis with the evidence of validating your worldview. You still have your work in front of you. Now, this has two implications. First, the burden of proof is entirely and wholly on you, Mormon apologists, or anyone wishing to challenge that consensus. You can't sit there and hold your extraordinary, bizarre view and wait for outsiders to come along and undermine it. That's not how it works. You have to make the positive case. You have to advance the proofs. You have to advance the claims and the arguments and make sure they convince the consensus. The crucial point, I would say, actually the only point worth discussing, is whether the peoples described in the Book of Mormon scenario were actually present in the New World at roughly the right time and the right place. That's key. See, the scholarly and the academic consensus on this is rock solid. They were not. And that must be the default assumption. I have zero obligation to disprove the existence of these peoples, still less anything particular about them. You have an absolute 100% obligation to prove their existence if you can. If you choose not even to make the attempt, well, that's your choice. But it means that you have no argument and no credibility in anything you say about this issue of Book of Mormon historicity. It's your call. You cannot just assume. To take an analogy, nobody wishing to be taken seriously could stand there and proclaim, Tolkien was an inspired prophet. Middle Earth is real. Disprove it if you dare. Now, if that analogy seems farcical or trivializing to you, it contains a very serious point. From the point of view of virtually all academics, and certainly those dealing with the New World history or archaeology, the Book of Mormon carries precisely as much or as little credibility as objective fact as does the Lord of the Rings. Now, you might not like that fact. We get it, but fact it is. If you want to change that reality, then you must make the case. That's the bottom line. That's what you're stuck with. My response is astonishingly, or actually perhaps not so, Hamblin really never grasps this point, as Jenkins has to repeat it several more times in this debate. Astonishingly. So Jenkins goes on. Second, any arguments or points supporting the Book of Mormon's historicity constitute extraordinary claims, which are, so to speak, from the furthest far left field. Of course, then they demand extraordinary evidence, but more important, that evidence must be assessed by the most rigorous and indeed impregnable standards of plausibility. I think something like the Daubert criteria outlined above provide those standards. If you disagree, I ask to know your reasons. So the deal breaker on a personal level, I ask once again for you personally, what would it take for you to disbelieve in the Book of Mormon, the historicity of the Book of Mormon? And as I remarked, you can only give one answer to that question, but you have to stick with it. We're dealing with archaeology, which is an empirical experimental discipline. So we have to confront the falsifiability theme more directly. So it's up to you. These are matters that demand debate. Does any objective evidence support your case? Do you believe that any or all of the claims of the New World in the Book of Mormon support any form of objectable, verifiable evidence? If so, what is it? If you believe that a great deal of it exists, please give a couple of specific examples. And there's no way these questions are unreasonable in the context of this debate. They can't be. So why you will not, and you cannot produce any objective, verifiable evidence, you're never going to be able to produce it anyway, especially on any aspect of the Book of Mormon's claims about the New World that meets the standards laid out here. And do note that I'm talking about testing and verifying particular claims about the Book of Mormon and its scenarios, rather than the futile project of proving the Book of Mormon as such. So, to take a purely hypothetical example, I do not suggest that you are proposing such. You might cite evidence that a newly discovered temple in the Yucatan actually does contain a Semitic inscription, that is something from the ancient Near East, and it can plausibly be dated to the 4th or 3rd century BC. And that the text even included a name recognizable from the Book of Mormon. That would be a sensational find, literally the find of the century, Bill Hamblin. But how the story is presented matters crucially. Say if a few people just discussed it at a conference, say a fair conference, or if it featured in some newspaper stories in a private printed pamphlet, it would remain in the realm of anecdote. And you know this. Only if it is properly reported in a peer-reviewed journal will and should the claim receive the attention that will bring detailed testing and verification. In short, the test of falsifiability. That's why you must publish in peer-reviewed journals, right? Perhaps it would prove genuine, but perhaps not. But that is clearly moot because you're not going to produce any such example. If you had access to such a thing, you would have assuredly have flourished it in my face long before now. That would have been the first thing Bill Hamblin gave Philip Jenkins if he had it. Nor do I think you're willing or able to produce far less spectacular and more quotidian proofs, because you don't even have those. I've asked repeatedly for credible evidence in the form of one shred of pottery, one tool of bronze or iron, one carved stone, one piece of genetic data, but you don't have any of the above, do you? Because if you did, you would have already presented it after this month and a half of debating. It would have been here already, but it's not. So that's why you're never going to have it. Am I wrong? Jenkins is getting tough. In my view, it's pointless for you to argue at length why certain kinds of evidence could not be available, as in your recent contributions. I might agree with your view or not, but that's immaterial. As I've said, it is wholly up to you to produce positive evidence that the Book of Mormon peoples existed. So why are you just constantly and obsessively telling me why evidence does not exist, as opposed to pointing to what does exist, if indeed it does? Why are you wasting your time like this? See, to me, it's utterly inconceivable that a great and long-lasting civilization like that postulated by the Book of Mormon, over 1,000 years, mind you, should have vanished without leaving a trace. Whether that trace genetic, archaeological, textual, or linguistic. It does not matter. You, on the other hand, feel you have plenty of valid reasons why such a total obliteration could or should have occurred, so that such evidence is not forthcoming and perhaps never could be. You have already argued that we should never expect to find any relevant pottery or inscriptional evidence. But our difference of approach is perhaps irrelevant. Where you and I are completely at one, I think, is in agreeing that no such observable, verifiable remains or vestiges of that supposed civilization exist for scholars to examine. I emphasize this part too. It's a very important part, and then I'm going to call it good for tonight. I'm at 2.5 hours and people are starting to leave a little bit. So without such positive, objective, verifiable evidence subject to the rules and conditions that I've laid out here, then you have zero grounds to support or advocate the historicity of the Book of Mormon other than religious faith. That's allowed. But that isn't susceptible to academic discussion or examination. I cannot, must not, and never will discuss your personal faith in any way, positive or negative. My one complaint is that you represent your views as a matter of objective scholarship rather than the devout faith of an individual. And that's where I disagree. In that case, what do we have left to talk about? Such, at least, is my perspective. And here I think I will stop because Jenkins continues to mop the floor with Hamblin's epistemology. And I really do think the better way to present this is yet again add a third part to this, which, because we're all kind of tired. We've been at this for 2.5 hours. It'd be nice to come at this fresh again. So I'll tell you what I'm going to do for you guys. Understand this. Listen up. I'm going to do a special live Backyard Professor Responds video. Let's do it on, well, I can do it either tomorrow night or Tuesday night. I will do it on one of those 2 nights where I will present a part 3 to continue this and finish it. This is so important that I want to give the full magnitude of this entire discussion, because this is the watershed in Mormon apologetics. For me personally, that absolutely convinced me apologetics doesn't have it. And therefore, there's no point in me being an apologist. I had already stopped being an apologist, but I was in that kind of iffy space, wondering, well, should I try to make it work again, or should I just sit quiet for a while and maybe a miracle will show up? Maybe the Holy Ghost will come and whisper in my soul and I'll have a miracle happen and I can go back to church or whatever. This discussion right here absolutely blew the doors off any hope for the Holy Ghost performing a miracle. So I'm going to write this down. I guess I shouldn't really worry about whether it's Tuesday night. Hey, RFM, how you doing? Colin, good to see you. RFM's returning the favor. I got to his podcast late, and now he's getting to mine late. Oh, we love each other. Barton Bargness, good to see you. Let's see. It looks like Tuesday night is the one. Tuesday. Hey, 406. Oh, that's right. Tomorrow is Mormon news. Yeah, of course, and I've got Mormon news here too, but not the way these guys do. Okay, yeah, let's do it Tuesday. I agree. Yeah, there's no point in trying to I'm not interested in competing with everybody. I'm interested in letting everybody have their voice and say so. So Tuesday night it is. Tuesday's good. Okay. Tuesday night, you guys. I'm gonna do this on Tuesday night. And now I'm gonna start it at about same time, 6 o'clock. I'll start at 6 o'clock. Tuesday, 6 p.m. for part 3. Wish I had a pen that worked. Hold on, I guess I do. Tuesday, 6 p.m. Part 3. Jenkins Hamblin. Hey, thanks for all your support and love and all that jazz and fun. I hope you enjoyed it. I love this kind of stuff because it is intellectually and spiritually liberating. It is freeing of my soul. That's what I love about this. Now, I'm on page, hold on. Jenkins, I'm on page 63 of 149. I have 149 pages of material here. I got through 63 of it. That tells you how big this debate was. Of course, then I haven't included, I'm just saying, there is still so much good stuff. You're going to love Tuesday night. Let's do this Tuesday night, and I'm not kidding. You won't be disappointed. There's just no way you're ever going to be disappointed with it. So anyway, I know it could be a 5-parter. Yeah, I will get out of here, Fly. I got a pen, thank you. All right, you guys, Tuesday night, let's do it. I'm going to head out. Appreciate all you guys. Appreciate all your support. Appreciate all your love. It's a lot of fun to do this, to explore other options that as Mormons stuck within the church, we did not even know these were available. We thought that the church was telling us the truth. We thought that the defenders and the apologists were giving us the valid methodology, and to find out that they weren't, yeah, it can be heartbreaking. Yeah, it can be disappointing. Yeah, it can be very, very frustrating. I'm here to tell you that. But it's also liberating. It's also freeing, and that is exhilarating. There really is light at the end of the tunnel. There really is life after Mormonism. There really is an actual spirituality still, even though it's not within the confines of the only true church on the face of the earth and the kingdom of God, as they love to call themselves. You see. So anyway, exciting times. We live in great times. So, okay, I'm going to head out, you guys. Appreciate all of you. I got to go. I will see you Tuesday night, 6 o'clock. Be there or be square.